This is just going to be a fun, random stream. I can't sleep right now, so I thought I'd stream for a little bit, and we'll see how long this goes. I don't know how many people even join live, but if you do catch this after the fact, feel free, leave a comment. I'm happy to answer any questions or continue the discussion, maybe consider a point I didn't bring up. But yeah, I just want to talk about doing more with less because it's something that I feel like really fuels me. It's kind of my ethos or my mantra, my mission to do as much as I can with as little as possible. And maybe almost sometimes, to a detriment because you take on so much with so little that maybe it warranted a bigger budget or more people or something like that. But I think it's a really good foundation to have because I find that oftentimes excuses are almost always projected externally. So a lot of times you'll see that people, probably myself included, will blame the equipment, the circumstance, the situation for any shortcomings or any problems that might arise. And usually those are warranted. Like most of the time, it probably is. It is you didn't have enough time, you didn't have enough budget, you didn't have enough people, whatever the case may be. But I think it's really important to still try and do as much as you can with as little as possible because it trains you for those situations so that if you do find yourself with a bigger budget or more time, it's kind of a nice luxury to have and you can feel a little bit more comfortable. But you know that you're going to find yourself in a situation where you don't have the right equipment or you don't have enough people or you don't have as much time as you'd like. This is the case with production. It's always the way, whether it's photography, video, short film, narrative, documentary, whatever it is, there's always situations that arise where you're problem solving. And it's probably that case in most industries. And that's what a professional does. They solve problems. They figure it out. They don't make excuses. So you can take the approach of something happened the way it did because of you didn't have the right equipment or you didn't have enough time. But I think it's far more valuable to not let those excuses get in the way and do as much as you can with as little as possible and prepare for those situations so that you don't have to make those excuses. So one of the things that comes up oftentimes with camera equipment is that there's always more lenses to buy, there's always better lights or newer models with more dynamic range or better autofocus, higher resolution, this, that, whatever. The new features, all the marketing stuff of why you need to buy, the new thing, the next thing. And it can be very tempting to say that your skills and what you're able to deliver is the direct result of the equipment that you're using. But oftentimes, that's not always the case. A lot of times, more expensive equipment doesn't result in any meaningful better difference because at the end of the day, it comes down to the talent of the individual using the equipment. A hammer or a drill don't do very much on their own, but in the hands of a skilled carpenter, they can do a lot. And in the hands of an unskilled carpenter, they can do basically nothing, or maybe they'll do a bad job. They'll ruin it. And the same is true with cameras. You can have the most expensive lenses, you can have the most expensive camera, the best stuff, and you can still deliver garbage because at the end of the day, it's not really about that. A lot of times you'll see online, there's the photography competitions, like the professional photographer with the $50 camera versus the amateur photographer with the $5,000 Hasselblad or whatever camera it is. And those are a fun novelty to kind of illustrate this concept in a sillier way, but in a real tangible way, I find that oftentimes mistakes that shooters make do get blamed on the equipment when really they just weren't fully prepared for the task, and maybe it wasn't an ideal circumstance, but how often is it ideal? Sometimes you're filming and it's below freezing. Sometimes you're filming and it's raining or it's snowing or you're in the desert and it's, 120. There's so many situations that are less than ideal outside of our circumstances. So what I like to do is prepare myself to do as much as I can with as little as possible. And that usually comes down to lots and lots of practice. And by practice, I mean going out of your way to do passion projects, to do work for yourself that allows you the room to make the mistakes. Because another thing that happens a lot of the times is that when it's the client job, if it's the paid gig, you don't have the room for the mistakes. There isn't really that like, oh yeah, like we'll get it next time, no big deal. Because they're the one that's like a paid situation, right? And if you're a professional and you're charging a decent rate for your skills, you should be bringing the best skills to the table. And I think that more people should be doing stuff in their free time, which, you spend your free time how you spend your free time. But if you want to be the absolute best professional, you should be shooting as much as possible, whether it's paid or unpaid. And if it's unpaid, it shouldn't be for somebody else, but do that stuff for yourself so you can find those opportunities to make mistakes, to learn the things you don't know you didn't know. That's usually what it comes down to. The more you work, the more you realize how much you don't know. And it's better to make those mistakes on those jobs than on the ones where, there's a client on the line and you might, risk your reputation and you might fail at one job and maybe it doesn't seem like it matters all that much in the moment, but that failure at that one job could mean you don't get 10 more jobs in the future. And that's kind of like the hidden cost to some of that stuff that often is hard to quantify because you don't really know. But you won't always want to do the best you can, because if you do the best you can and you deliver good work, usually that's going to lead to more work in the future. Not always, but it usually should. And if you make those mistakes or there's those excuses, it can be you might not get work. That you don't even, and you won't even know it. It's just you just won't have the jobs, and you go, "What? How come, man? It's hard out there." So do as much as you can with as little as possible. And in practical terms, what does that mean for me? A lot of times I'll shoot with just like a basic camera, simple lens, natural light, the most cheap audio setup I can find, and how much can you achieve with that? Because nowadays, you can achieve quite a bit. It's not down to the resolution anymore, right? The cameras are 4K and 8K now. That's not a problem anymore. Dynamic range, yes, there's cameras that have more dynamic range, but it's not like 8 stops like it used to be. It's digital, so you can see directly what you're filming. It's not it's not film where you have to know kind of taking all your metering and everything to know, is my exposure right? You can literally see it. You can see if you're overexposed or underexposed, and people still get that stuff wrong. It's the little things that all add up, the fundamentals. I think a lot of mastery and being great is just doing the little things right and doing that consistent time and time again. It's easy to get a nice looking shot, once every 100 shots, but is it in focus every time? Is it exposed properly every time? Is the composition good every time? Does it sound good? Does it look good? That's the little things just all add up. Is it stable? As I'm watching my camera shake a little bit, I have the stabilization on. I don't know if it's actually shaking or not. The setup is not perfectly stable. But if you're shooting handheld, is it stable? Or are you shaking too much? And then you say, oh, well, I need a rig. I need a gimbal of some kind. Do you need that? Or do you just need to practice more so that you can be more stable? Because, the same excuse could be said for like a surgeon. Like they always say, like the surgeon's hands, like they're so stable. Well, how does it get that way? Is it's exercise, certainly. It's practice, it's patience, it's staying calm, it's all those things. And the same is true for shooting. Oftentimes I am shooting handheld, and there's a lot of times where it's hard to be stable, but you have to do it. Otherwise, you fail, and it's inconsistent, right? Same thing like with exposure. It can be hard to judge exposure off of a LCD screen when it's outside during the day. So do you use the viewfinder? Do you squint through? You make that work? Do you kind of shade yourself? Or do you say, oh, I need all this fancy rigging and equipment. I need a flag overhead. I need all these things so I can do my job properly. Those are nice to have, but I don't think they should ever be a necessity. I think they should be a want, not a need. I think you should be able to do as much as you can with as little as possible. Do you need an external monitor? Well, you can want one, and I think they're very valuable. I use them. But what if the HDMI cord fails? What if you don't have an HDMI cord? This literally happened to me on a shoot. It was actually the GH6 with the Shinobi. I was building out the kit and the monitor, the 5-inch monitor. Oh, it's perfect, hooking everything up, and I'm not getting signal. I'm not getting signal. I'm not getting signal. And it turned out it was a problem with the GH6 actually that thankfully was under warranty. I shipped it off, it got it repaired, and no big deal. But the HDMI port just wasn't working. Had a second unit there that was working fine, so it was whatever. I kind of made it work. But in that moment, if I had said, "Oh, I can't film because I need a monitor," I wouldn't have been able to do the job because the equipment was broken. It wasn't working at that moment. There's no chance to like go swap it with something else. It was what it was. Is the camera broken? No. I just couldn't use a monitor. Was I still able to have stuff in focus and exposed? Yes, because I have a monitor on the camera that's built in. I have a viewfinder. I have all the tools. They may not be the best, most ideal tools, but I have the tools to do the job. It's not impossible. And I kind of think that oftentimes that can be the crutch. And I worry about those people who get used to all those things that's what you need to do the job well. And then what happens if those things are stripped away? What happens if the HDMI port goes bad, or you forget a cable, or a battery dies, or something goes wrong? Because inevitably it will. Will you be prepared? And you'll say, you just roll with the punches, you deal with it, you solve the problem. Or do you say, oh, I can't do this because I need, X, Y, or Z? How many times have I been traveling for production and a bag gets lost, something doesn't show up, I forgot to pack something. These things happen over and over and over and over again, and you can do everything you can in your power. You control all the variables. You do as best as you can, but it's still going to happen. You're still going to find yourself in a situation where you have to solve the problem. And the best practice I can say to do is just to do as much as you can, as much as in your free time, as much as possible, with as little as possible, and see how much you can actually do. I think working that way hardens you in a really valuable way, so that when you have all the bells and whistles and you have the bigger budget and you have more time, you're more efficient with that time. You use the equipment to its maximum rather than relying so much on it that it becomes a crutch. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's something I've found often, that if you're only stable with a gimbal, what happens when you don't have the gimbal? Versus if you're stable without a gimbal, think of how much more stable you'll be with the gimbal. You know what I mean? If that makes sense, it's kind of this, set the foundation as strong as possible. Build that base solid so that all the equipment, everything else you add on top just makes it better and better and better, rather than having a really weak foundation and you're relying so much on the technology, on the stabilization, on this, on that, to fix the problem. Like nowadays, stuff is getting so advanced with AI and all the systems that you can do to sharpen your images and to fix noise and to do this and reduce motion blur and all these things. They're great tools, but how much better are they when they're not just making something bad look good, but they're taking something good and making it perfect, or, pristine, as best as it can be. And that's why I think it's so valuable to do more with less. Nowadays, social media content comes and goes, and people just swipe past a photo. They'll watch a video for a few seconds and then they'll move on. So, really getting the most out of that content is important, I think, because you want to showcase your skills. You only have a few seconds to catch someone's attention and impress them. But also, you don't want to invest all your time and effort and energy in something that is here and gone, and on to the next day when there's some new thing in the feed. And finding that balance, I think, is really satisfying, because you probably never get it quite right. There's always times where you probably invest a little bit too much, and other times you invest a little too little. But you never really go wrong when you can do, nowadays you can do amazing things with so little. The technology is there. It's not an excuse anymore. And all the problems usually come down to the person. And that's something I have to keep telling myself often. When I have issues or when I'm trying to make something work, what's the part of me that I can fix? It's not just going to Amazon and buying something new to solve the problem. Oh, now I need a different type of stabilizer, or I need this camera system, or I need that lens, or, solve the problems with the basics. Because then when you do add those things in the future, you just get that much better. And I think that's a really important thing that maybe a lot of people understand. Maybe it's self-evident. I don't know. But I often, the excuses are the easy way out. The harder thing is looking in the mirror and saying, oh, how could I have been better? That's always the hardest part. And it's usually the part that people don't want to confront themselves with, because they want to just say, oh, I didn't have the right thing. I didn't have enough time. I didn't have enough of this or that or whatever. Lights are cheap and relatively lightweight nowadays. They don't get hot anymore. You can plug them in. You can plug in 5 of them into house outlets, where back in the day you could only plug in one light, and maybe not even. Maybe it would blow the breaker. Audio, very affordable nowadays. Video, very affordable. Photography, very affordable. At a level where you can compete with professional Hollywood films for only hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, where it used to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions. There's so much that you can do, and yet people still say, oh, I couldn't possibly do that because I'm not this, or I'm not that, or I don't have the right thing. There's no secret tool. There's no special magic button that you can press that just makes you a filmmaker, makes you a professional photographer, makes you the perfect editor. It's the practice. It's the doing it over and over and over again, because then you're always getting better, and you're looking back a year ago, 2 years ago, saying, wow, look how far I've come. I do that even with the GH5. I'm still using the GH5 on certain projects and still getting the absolute most out of that camera, where 5 years ago I would have thought, oh yeah, I got this down, I got it mastered. Oh, it's just the dynamic range. It's just the limitation of the dynamic range. It's just the limitation of the codec. It's just the limitation of, fill in the blank, X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. Yep, can't do autofocus, so there's no possible way that it could be in focus. Well, keep practicing, keep getting better, learn, challenge yourself, push yourself. Equipment, it can be a Band-Aid. It can solve a problem in the moment, but really building that foundation is probably the absolute best thing you can do. So you can do as much as possible with as little as possible. And that way you just maximize that efficiency. To me, that's the sweet spot, efficiency. Do as much as you can with as little as possible. And I think you'll be in a really good spot.